Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to today's live stream. Check in and let me know where you're from here while we get some more viewers here. Looks like Ed in Ocean View, Delaware. I'm just up the road from you here in Margate there, Ed. Ocean View, I'm going to think that that's probably on the east coast of Delaware. There's Ed from Seattle. Rick checking in from Australia, which is awesome. We got Rhonda from Vermont. Rick, thanks for joining us from Australia. You said it's 1 a.m, so this is dedication, my man. Let's see here. Got some familiar faces. Selena from Florida. Grant here. Grant, I forget where you're from, but I know it's stateside here. Looks like Dan Lanowski from Michigan Soilworks checking in, or maybe it's his lovely wife Brenda in Michigan, just outside of Detroit. There's Tom, Nancy from Frederick. Nancy, you probably know I'm Baltimore-based first officer with Southwest, so a lot of our pilots live over there in Frederick. Peter checking in from Tampa Bay. Carol from Georgia. Grant, you're in Southern Illinois. Thanks, man. Living Soil Productions, I'll have to check that out. In East Texas. Gorat's Ghost here on YouTube from Massachusetts. Teresa from Louisiana. Cool. Thanks everybody. Stephanie from Texas, appreciate it. Awesome. Well, people are still trickling in here, so I'm just going to go ahead and start talking about some little bit of housekeeping stuff. I am here on vacation in the Oceanside. Well, I'm not Oceanside. I'm a few blocks away, but we're in Margate, New Jersey. If you're familiar with Atlantic City, we're just south of that and just north of Ocean City, New Jersey. So real life is happening here. You're probably going to hear my dogs bark. One of my son's friends is going to come over, and my dogs are probably going to go crazy. Neighbors are mowing their lawn right now, so you're hearing a lot of life happening around me. So anyway, I just want to get that out of the way. So this is going to be a solo show. Troy normally does these. Troy is actually in Virginia right now. He's dropping his daughter off at college, her freshman year of college, and so he's got bigger things to do than to sit here and chit chat about worms. So this will be just me talking to you today. Our live stream schedule in September is going to be a little bit reduced. A couple things going on. Troy has been selected to go to Jamaica as part of the State Department's USAID Farmers Assistance Program. He's going to go there and help with soil health. They're really, especially with what the cost of fertilizer is doing these days, is people really want to move towards organic. And so Troy is going to go help out there. So he'll be there for 2 weeks. It's really awesome. I'm glad that we're able to kind of support that endeavor. So anyway, really happy for Troy. I will be out of town actually in Dallas, Texas for about 3 weeks at a school for Southwest Airlines. So I will be, if you're familiar with the airline world, there's 2 pilots. I'm going to become the guy that's in the left seat. And so that's going to require a little bit of training for me. So my days will be taken up sitting through class and sitting through doing simulators with Southwest. So anyway, we'll do a couple more before those things happen. So today's only the 17th, so there should be 2 more of these before our September schedule kind of gets in full swing. A lot of people, one of the questions that we're going to get this time of year, that we always get this time of year, is hot weather vermicomposting. How do you do it? We did a live stream on this, not last week, but the week before. I also have a good blog post on urbanwormcompany.com. You can basically get some tips about how to keep your worm bin going through this hot weather. Right now, I don't know what it's like in the other parts of the country, but here in New Jersey, we had some really unseasonably, or in the Pennsylvania area, we had some really unseasonably hot temperatures. That's very much cooled off now. It's much nicer, but still, it's hot throughout the country. So, looking up those resources would be very helpful for you. Let's see. I'm really excited. We're about to do a website upgrade for urbanwormcompany.com. This has been a long time in the making. It's really hard when you've got a website that's sort of this living, breathing thing to try to move on and move to a different design, because it's just difficult, because you got to convert all your content from one thing to the other, and it just can be a serious pain in the butt. But I'm really excited about it. It's been a lot of hard work for other people, but then I've also had to do some little bit of editing and stuff myself. But the website's going to be much faster. Websites, as they grow, just can get bloated with all sorts of code that they don't need. You install something and then you uninstall something, and then the code remains. It just slowly degrades things over time. So I'm really happy, and I think the organization of the website is going to be much greater, or much better, and much more easy for you to navigate. And I'm sorry if you're hearing the lawnmower outside, but nothing I can do about that. Anyway, I look forward to showing you that website. So the other thing I would say is, if you are watching this live, or if you're watching this after the fact, I'd love it if you subscribed. We do this every week. Subscribe on YouTube. I'd love it if you either did that or liked us on Facebook. Either way, you're going to get notified of these live streams when we do them, and also you'll see the posts that we do for other, not just live streams, but other YouTube videos. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, check in, tell us where you're from. I'm going to go ahead, since I'm doing this today, I'm just also going to post this here. So if you've got questions about what we're talking about, go ahead and post them, and I'm going to go ahead and get to it at the end. Let's see if I can make this a bottom. There we go. So yeah, post questions for me. I won't be able to answer in the middle of it, but if it's about anything to do with today's topic or any other vermicomposting topic, I will get to it there at the end. So I'm going to share my screen. Actually, I'm going to have to, again, the dangers of live live stream here, is I closed the tab where where the presentation was. So let me open this up here real fast. We'll get to that, and I'm going to go ahead and open this up. Of course, when you're staring at it, it doesn't seem to want to open. Here we go. Play the slideshow. I'm going to share my screen with you all, and we will get started. I'm going to actually hide this. I'm going to, sorry about this, everybody. Going to hide that. Share my screen. And we will get started. So let's do this slideshow. Okay, cool. Here we are. That was painful, but sorry about that. Anyway, welcome again. Today's August 17th. We're going to be talking about the 4 composting worm species that are the most common, and then how, basically which one is going to be the best for you. So these are kind of broken down into kind of more temperate and tropical species. They are all what's called epigeic worms, and epigeic is Greek for on the earth. So these are worms that live above the topsoil, but below layers of very loose organic matter, like leaves on the forest floor. That's a great kind of that carpet of leaves that you get on the forest floor. Epigeic worms are going to live between those 2 layers. The two of the types of worms we're going to talk about today, the red wiggler and European nightcrawler, are temperate. They like a bit of a cooler range of temperatures, whereas the African nightcrawler and Indian blue are going to be more tropical worms. And then we will get to a Q&A at the end. And I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. I think a lot of you know a lot of this stuff already, but this will be a good refresher for you, and then also good for the folks who are just joining us. So epigeic worms, like I said, epigeic, there are three categories of worms: epigeic, endogeic, and anesic. So if we start with epigeic, that's Greek for on the earth. Endogeic would be in the earth, and then anesic, I'm assuming that that's Greek as well. It's basically the worms that are going to be down deeper in the topsoil that are muscular enough to burrow. All composting worms are going to be epigeic worms. It doesn't mean that there's not good compost, not good organic matter processing at all from the other worms. It's just that epigeic worms are specifically suited for that. There's about 7,000 and 9,000 worms in the world, species of worms, and really only about 5 of them, 5 to 7, are any good at vermicomposting. So these starting with this first bullet, they burrow above the surface, but it's not even burrowing because they don't really even need much muscle in order to work in the plant litter layer of the soil. These are going to be small, kind of scrawny worms, a little bit disappointing for people that want to fish with them. Even the large worms are not especially muscular. If you were to hold the largest worm, which is an African nightcrawler, it's going to be very, it's going to be large but limp. It's kind of like the dad bod of worms there, where it's got some size, but just maybe not the muscle that you that you would want or that you would expect. Epigeic worms are typically, because of where they live, are adapted to a kind of a wide range of temperatures and moistures. They need high amounts of organic matter, so you're generally not going to find these within soil. They're going to work to basically fragment organic matter and kind of turn it into a much more consistent, homogenized texture. And these worms are also hermaphrodites. Any worm of the same species can mate with another. So I talked about being scrawny. This is what I call an epigeic Jeff Bezos. And this would be an anesic Jeff Bezos with those big guns that he either naturally or artificially got for himself. So, all right, a little bit of enough of that humor. Red wiggler is going to be the most common composting worm, really in most countries. The binomial name, I call it the nerd name, is Eisenia fetida. These are also called manure worms, red worms, brambling worms, tiger worms. The tiger worm is probably actually going to be the Eisenia andrae, which is a very similar worm to the Eisenia fetida. These worms are going to be very red and brown, like reddish brown color, and they've got a very yellowish tail. And a lot of people think that something's wrong with their worms because they're going to think something's wrong with their worms because they see this yellow tail, but that's a telltale sign of a red wiggler. These are small worms, only 2 to 3 inches long, and you're going to get about 800 to 1,000 per pound. And you can expect these days to pay about $45 to $55 a pound. These are the best adapted to the widest range of climatic conditions. They've got a pretty high reproduction rate, and they really like a bin that's about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And most commercial worm farms in the U.S. use Eisenia fetida. So we'll just take a look at it. As you can see here, this is really a smaller adult. A larger adult is going to take up more of my hand. This is in my hand here. You can see this yellow tail. You can see a raised clitellum, and I'm going to come back to that raised clitellum issue when we show you the Indian blue, because that's really a great way to tell the difference between those two species, which often get confused with one another. So next is European nightcrawler. This is a larger cousin of the, this is thought to be a larger cousin of the red wiggler. Troy, who helped put these slides together, said that a few years ago, scientists determined that it's not necessarily a cousin. So it's the Dendrobana vendetta, or they are now calling it the Dendrobana hortensis. Now, I've sort of put Eisenia hortensis in here for those of you who might be more familiar with that terminology, but regardless, this is a worm that looks fairly similar to the red wiggler. I would actually struggle to tell the difference between a European nightcrawler, which is going to tend to be a little bit bigger than a red wiggler, and the European nightcrawler. It's going to be a little more pinkish of a worm. It's going to be a little bit longer, a little bit chubbier. It's sort of a good dual purpose worm for both bait and composting. It's probably the only composting worm that I would suggest that you use for fishing. You're going to be about 500 worms per pound, and you might pay a few bucks more depending on who you buy them through. These do like cooler temperatures. This is probably the biggest distinction, is that European nightcrawlers like it about 10 degrees cooler. I would say the range is, the bottom range is about probably 55 degrees before they kind of start showing signs of stress and really slowing down their reproduction and processing. But then the high end is going to be in the 80s or 80 to 85 range, where they kind of really start not liking that higher temperature. These are thought to reproduce a little bit more slowly, but at the same time, I will say that because it's a larger worm, the biomass that you get is probably going to be similar in terms of the biomass growth that you would get with a red wiggler. And these are considered invasive in some parts of the world that have have deciduous trees, much higher latitude than I am right now, and where probably most of you are. African nightcrawlers, this would be considered probably the second most popular composting worm if we judge by sales on our own website. We, through our supplier at Mimi's, sell mostly red wigglers, a little bit of European nightcrawlers, but I would say African nightcrawlers are our second most popular composting worm. The nerd name here is Eudrilus eugenae. It's going to be a much more purple worm. It's going to be much longer, growing to about 8 inches here. They are very, very good feeders, very good composters. Their castings are really interesting. It's if you were to handle red wiggler castings versus African nightcrawler castings, African nightcrawlers create this very granular cast that sort of flows through your hands like sand almost. It's kind of fascinating. This is one reason why I actually don't recommend to use African nightcrawlers in a commercial scale CFT like the kind that Michigan Soil Works produces, just because and it's not that I know this, it's just I wouldn't recommend doing the test, because you might learn the hard way that their castings just don't sort of stick to each other the same way, which actually means you would get self-harvesting in a continuous flow bin. I think you're a lot safer in something smaller like an urban worm bag, but the castings here are they're just different, and I like them. These are a larger worm. You're going to get about $300 per pound, and you might pay a few bucks more for these as well, 55 to 60 bucks on the high end per pound. They do like a warmer temperature. These really don't do well in colder temps. We had issues with dead on arrival shipments early in the spring when these were going to some places, and if they sit outside for a few hours at less than 50 degrees, you could see a die-off fairly rapidly. And the picture here is the lone African nightcrawler that we had in our Michigan Soil Works CFT at Urban Worm HQ. I don't think he's around anymore, but his name is Harvey, and I kept running into him. There was only one in there. So, all right, let's get to the Indian blue. This is probably one of the more, I don't want to say misunderstood worms, but we'll get to some of the differences here in a second. Its nerd name is Perionyx excavatus. It's called the blue or Indian blue, Malaysian blue. It does have a darker hue. It does not really have a yellow tail. You can see maybe down here on the right where, I don't know if that's more the sun shining off of it or it's a little bit yellowish, but it definitely lacks that yellow tail of that the red wiggler has. And it's going to grow to be a fairly similar worm to the red wiggler, or I'm sorry, a very similar size to the red wiggler. As the name implies, with Malaysian blue or Indian blue, it's native to Asia. It kind of prefers, or I should say tolerates, a lower pH than other worms. It wants a warmer temp, maybe around 75 degrees. And for those who sell Indian blues as sort of consciously selling Indian blues, which is a point I'm going to get to here in a second, they will sell them a little bit more cheaply at around $40 per pound. Now, I will say that a lot of worm sellers are going to, whether they know it or not, be selling Indian blues sort of as red wigglers. And a lot of people, honestly, I will say a lot of people don't care, because these are excellent composters. They seem to do the exact same things that red wigglers do. They look the same. They for the most part behave the same, with two exceptions here. One is these are much more active worms. These will tend to thrash around in your hands a little bit more. The red wiggler is just a little bit more chill. When they move in a greatly, it's this sort of elongated way that they move. They might even double their own length as they move across your hand. It's really kind of fascinating. The one thing that people say, okay, this is why I really don't want blues, is that blues can get sort of flighty during periods of low barometric pressure. Now, that's just kind of a big word salad here, but what I mean by this is if you have the onset of a thunderstorm, and this thing is, you know, starting to barrel through, in the front of that thunderstorm front, you're going to see a rapid drop in barometric pressure. When that happens, and this doesn't always happen, but it happens enough to irritate some people, is the Indian blues just say, I want out of this bin right now. And they will either gather around the top, or in some cases just flat out try to escape a bin. And if you have an open air bin, then these things will often try to escape. But otherwise, Indian blues are excellent vermicomposters. Some people think they're even better than red wigglers. It's just that they sort of have this tendency to escape. So when it comes to answering the question of what's the best for you, and I'm going to go ahead and unshare my screen and come back online with you. Let's unshare this top screen. There we go. Everybody can see me. That if, oh shoot, hold on. I want you to see my pretty, there we go. The worm that's likely going to be the best for you is probably going to be the red wiggler. Just because it is the most adaptable, it's the most forgiving worm. It sort of operates in the widest range of temperatures. So over here, you might have the European Nightcrawlers that likes it a little bit colder. And then over here, you've got the African Nightcrawler that needs it warmer. The red wiggler is going to be generally happy with all of that. I call the red wiggler the sort of the Ford Taurus or Honda Accord of composting worms. It's not a Ferrari. It's not an F-150. It does a lot of things okay, but it's generally just common and unsexy. So I would say also, because it's so readily available, it tends to be one of the cheaper worms out there. So anyway, with that, I will open up the floor to you guys. I know we've got some questions here. Let's see here. That would be a good one. Let me go to some of the starred questions I have, and then I'm going to have to look through some of the questions that I didn't star earlier, and then we'll get to some of those before we wrap up. So, No Dig Gardner asks, and he asked early on here before I started this. He said, do you not hold with the notion that worms actually don't actually eat the food that we put in the bins, but only the microbes that the food supports? If you were to put let's say an apple or something into your bin and just let it sit there, the worms are not going to actually take to it until it starts decomposing. And the thing that starts that decomposition are microbes. So what I say is that the microbes are the things that start, typically bacteria is what starts the decomposition process. And then the worms come in. It sort of prepares the food to be eaten, at which point the worms come in, eat the organic matter and the microbes. The worms do not survive on just microbes alone. So they are going to eat the food waste, but that food waste has to be, the battlefield, as it were, has to be prepared by the microbes. Hope that answers the question. Ed, it's got a good problem here on YouTube, says, it seems my worms are going through the food faster than the 1 week feeding schedule that he has them on. Do I shorten the cycle? I would say yes. I mean, you want to let your eyes and your nose be the guide to tell you if things are going kind of haywire or not. If your worms are eating all the food and you're not smelling anything bad and it looks like they are thriving, then go ahead, step up the feedings a little bit. And that's the kind of acceleration that you would see with a new worm bin, is that it's going to start off being a little bit disappointing, actually, because you don't have that thriving ecosystem of worms and microbes. But once you've got the temperature and stuff in place, they eat much more quickly. One thing I noticed it with the Urban Worm Bag and with the Michigan Soilworks CFT, is that you can really almost double the feedings when you're keeping temperatures in that sort of 72-degree range, where it's just really in the sweet spot. You can things accelerate there, and you can really do a lot more with the feedings. Carol said she's got a new worm bag. Thanks, Carol. And she just received her red wigglers from Mimi. The old setup was supposed to be red wigglers, but must have been all blues. And then she said they would escape when a storm came. Yes, that happens. I would say otherwise you've got an excellent composting worm on your hands, but you just have to, you just kind of have to accept that their tendency to escape. So anyway, Stephanie is asking, having a hard time deciding the best place to put my worm bin and worms to get. Well, I think that, Stephanie, if you can get red wigglers, I would just get red wigglers. She asks if she can put the bin on a shaded porch. I say in a lot of cases, yes. I think a worm bin, if you can manage it, should be kept inside. I love the fact that they could be in basements because it's dark, it tends to stay humid, it tends to have a very constant temperature. If you don't have a basement and you don't have a place inside, then yes, do the thing that you got to do, and it's put it outdoors. The thing is, a worm bin, whether it's especially if it's an urban worm bag, but even if it's just nothing more than a Rubbermaid bin, needs to be kept protected from direct sunlight, or else things will just sort of bake inside. It will get way too hot for the worms. In the case of the urban worm bag, it is a fabric bag, and it needs to be kept protected from direct sunlight and precipitation. Otherwise, it'll just sort of really disintegrate over time, and disintegrate quite quickly. Let's see here. Titanium Druid, that's a great name, has an urban worm bag with red wigglers. He read that he shouldn't fluff the bedding all the way down, but if I do dig a bit deeper, could that cause them to try and escape? I don't think so. I also don't think that there's probably a real reason to fluff your bin unless you've got some serious to do that, but it's not going to, I don't think, be tremendously helpful. I don't think that it's going to cause your worms to try to escape, though. So Living Soil says, what worms and materials would you recommend for outside worm rows in hot East Texas? And he says, love your product. He's friends with Samantha. I would still say probably red wigglers, just because even in East Texas, if you get into, this is a really tough question, because if you're doing outdoor vermicomposting in any place other than California, then you're gonna kind of have some temperature extremes that you have to deal with. Even East Texas will get down to freezing or close to it. So I would still say red wigglers in that case. You might experiment with African Nightcrawlers, but I'm just not 100% sure what to tell you there. I would say that one thing that you want to do is make sure that your outdoor windrows, if you're vermicomposting in them, maybe keep them with fresher material in the winter, which is going to make it warmer. You might even get a little bit of that hot composting going on, but that creates these zones where the worms will stay happy. But don't do that in the summer. You've already got heat issues in West Texas in the summer, and if you can, just shade your stuff as best you can. So let's see. Paul asks, he's got some very tiny white flies in the worm bin. Is it bad for my worms? Those are not likely bad. There are very few critters that are going to be in your worm bin that are bad for worms. What it may indicate is that things are a little bit off. be probably the white flies could be springtails. Sorry to be staring off into the abyss. It's likely that you might have gotten conditions a little bit too rich in your bin. Any worm bin critter, if you have it, what I would recommend is to stop feeding, add dry bedding, possibly even open up and air out your worm bin to allow more moisture to come in, dry things out, kind of deaden things with the bedding, and that should solve most worm bin issues. The hard part is if you're doing this inside and you've got critters that are in your worm bin now and you're married and want to stay married, then it's probably a good idea to possibly take it outside before you do that, or do it when your husband or wife is gone. Let's see here. This is an interesting question. I've got coconut coir, coffee grounds, some potting soil for grit. It looks all the same to me. How does one tell that you got finished castings from everything else? Coconut coir is gonna have sort of a stringy, kind of a stringy, sinewy material. Coffee grounds, it's a subtle difference. What I will say is that when the top of your vermicompost, it looks like it's ready to be fed again, and I'm only talking about the top, it's going to have almost a fuzzy look like the top of a pool table. It's going to go from being chunky to flattened over time. And so that when it comes to finished enough to feed again, you're probably looking for something that where you've got that flattening, we call it a pool table effect. But in terms of harvesting the castings, I would probably stop feeding after you get that pool table effect, let it go another 2 to 3 weeks at least, and then just harvest the entire bin if you're not using a continuous flow bin. So KB asks if, and this is relevant to our topic today, is that she has a bin, I think it's a she, I'm sorry, mixed bin with red wigglers and Indian blues. Will they reproduce as quickly, or is it best to separate them? I don't think you need to separate them, to be honest with you, but they will not reproduce with one another. So if you have a certain density of worms, let's call it 1 pound of worms per square foot, and half of them are one species and half are another, you effectively have 0.5 pound per square foot when it comes to the opportunities for them to interact and breed and make cocoons. So that's the bad thing about having a mixed species, is you're going to get slower reproduction, I believe. So let's see here. I think we have got, let's see. Yeah, I had to move my vermicompost bin inside, and how can I keep worms alive during the winter? So Freda asked that on YouTube. Freda, I would go search for winter vermicomposting urban worm, and you're going to find what I would tell you to do. Yes, bring them inside. A garage is another good place. If you've got a garage where you actually keep your car, if you're one of the weirdos that actually parks your car in the garage, that's a kind of an interesting way to heat your worm bin. Garages that where you park your car tend to stay on average 10 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside air temperature, because of a couple things. You get the heat radiating from the home, especially a poorly insulated home like mine. But then also if the car that's being parked in the garage is driving a lot, then it actually has this heater inside the engine block that is cooling and sort of radiating heat out, and those additive effects can really help. The one thing I will tell you to do that's the biggest hack is a seed starting mat or a heat mat that you would use to place underneath seedling trays. That is an excellent way of providing a low level amount of heat to your worm bin, that in a way that's not going to dry it out. So I've used like heating coils before. I've used incandescent heat lights, and that just dries things out. And I almost started a fire in my own worm bin, believe it or not. So yeah, don't do that. I would use a seed starting mat if you are keeping your worm bin in a place that is near electricity. And I will tell you that a 20-inch, so there's a company called VivoSun, manufactures a 20-inch by 20-inch seed starting mat that fits perfectly in an urban worm bag. So cool. Let's see here. Will in-bed vermicompost help keep worms alive? Freda asks. In extreme weather, depends on how extreme it is. The one nice thing about having a lot of volume with an in-ground bed or an on-ground bed with a lot of volume is that it provides this buffer against extreme temperatures. So there's a concept called thermal mass, which is the ability of a material to store and absorb and sort of release heat. So it's not going to go through the same fluctuations during the day. So especially if you're in a place like Texas where it might get cool at night, but then really hot during the day, it's never going to get as hot in the middle of this material as the outside temperature. And at night, it's probably going to be warmer than the outside air temperature. So instead of the fluctuations happening like this, it's much more kind of deadened, and you need a lot of volume in order to make that happen. That's why I say I always recommend the biggest worm bin that you can get is going to be the most forgiving place to do vermicomposting. If you're a newbie trying to do vermicomposting in a coffee can, it's going to be difficult. So and on the bed or in the bed or on the ground or in the ground vermicomposting bed is a good idea if you can do it. Let's see, how to run a seed starting mat outside if not near an outlet, a car battery or a battery pack. Yes, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure what to tell you there. I don't know. I'm not an electrician, but any way that you can power these, they really draw very little power to do what they do. But honestly, anything that creates heat is by definition sort of inefficient from an electrical standpoint. So it may actually draw more power than I think it does. So let's see here. I think that is going to about cover what we have here in terms of questions. I appreciate everybody checking in. If you've got any other questions, go ahead and fire them out now. My dogs are downstairs whining because everybody left and they know that I'm up here by myself. You might be able to hear it. Yeah, if you got any more questions, throw them out here. If you haven't subscribed, I would love it if you subscribed on YouTube, especially. We try to do these as much as possible. One of the things is when I get home here in a couple weeks and before I head off to Dallas for my training, I'd like to do a couple more actual YouTube videos, not live streams, but I really enjoy doing that. It's just that my studio is my barn and it gets awfully hot in the summer. So I want to use this fall to actually do some more videos for you guys. So anyway, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. It's a little bit of a shorter one today. I hope that you enjoyed it. Love to see your comments. I do read all the comments. It's hard for me to respond to all of them, but I appreciate everybody checking in. Come check us out at urbanwormcompany.com. In a couple weeks, we will be launching the new website, which will be much faster and much more easy to navigate. So thank you very much. We'll wrap it up here, and I hope everybody has a great day. All right.